Thank You for Arguing talks about the importance of arguments and rhetoric and teaches you how to persuade other people by setting goals for your conversations, identifying main issues, using knowledge, having the characteristics to win an argument and prove a valid point. In Part 1, Offense, Hendricks talks about the basics of arguing. Every argument has 3 basic steps. First, making the readers feel a certain emotional response, then changing the audience's opinion, and third, making the audience act on their changed opinion. He goes into talking about 3 different kinds of arguments. Aristotle, a renowned Greek philosopher, identified these 3 kinds of arguments as forensic argument, which deals with blame and which takes place in past tense, demonstrative argument, which it talks about the values and which takes place mostly in the present tense, and deliberative argument, which it deals with choices and which takes place in future tense. Aristotle developed another important rhetorical distinction: the 3 methods of persuasion: logos, argument by logic; ethos, argument by character; and pathos, argument by emotion. And in the rest of the first part of the book, Hendricks discusses how to use logos, ethos, pathos to win an argument. In order to enhance one's ethos or character, a good persuader will try to master how to blend in and become one with the audience. This might involve dressing in appropriate clothing or using words with which the audience identifies. Other important ways of increasing one's ethos in the audience's eyes include appearing as if they have the same values as the audience, appearing to have common sense and wisdom, and appearing to be morally disinterested, having the audience's best interest in mind. To use pathos, persuaders need to be conscious of their audience's emotional needs. Humor is one of the most powerful emotions, and therefore it's one of the best ways to appeal to pathos. Another clever technique for using pathos is to appear to be holding back one's emotions. Many advertisements use pathos by appealing to people's desires. One of the most important aspects of logos is the definition of terms. By defining terms in an advantageous way, debaters can stack the deck against their opponents. One useful debating technique is to redefine an opponent's definition of the terms without being overly detailed. But on other occasions, debaters can be more successful by agreeing with their opponent's definitions and then using these definitions to win. Hendricks refers to this technique of tactical agreement as concession. Another important application of logos is logic. Deductive logic involves reaching conclusions through symbolism, showing how certain categories fit together. By contrast, deductive reasoning, or inductive logic, involves reaching conclusions by generalizing from a series of related examples. Both inductive and deductive logic can be useful in an argument. In Part 2, Defense, Hendricks begins by discussing some of the major logical false topics that show up in arguments. By mastering these false topics, debaters can take control over their argument and show that their opponents aren't thinking rationally. Common logical false topics include false comparisons, drawing a bad analogy, the bad example, generalizing from insufficient evidence, and ignorance as proof, mistaking absence of evidence for evidence of absence. The false choice, snaring an audience's decisions, offering distracting, irrelevant evidence. And Hendricks stresses that in an argument, a good debater won't simply call out his opponent for using a logical false fact. Instead, he'll find a clever way of exposing the false fact while seizing the higher ground and moving the argument forward. Hendricks further writes that the only reason to call foul in an argument is if someone argues the inarguable. For instance, if someone refuses to budge on their beliefs or argues only to humiliate an opponent. In the rest of Part 2, Hendricks demonstrates how to evaluate someone's ethos by testing their values, practical wisdom, and disinterest. In Part 3, Advanced Defense, Hendricks discusses some rhetorical tricks that rhetoricians can use to spice up their arguments. There are many figures of speech and figures of thought that can be used to make an argument elegantly simple or make the expression of that argument seem particularly memorable. Good rhetoricians must also use code grooming. They must immerse themselves in their audience's favorite words in order to use language that will persuade and boost the rhetorician's ethos. As a consultant, Hendricks pioneered a technique called the halo, offering a symbol that encapsulates a complex idea. Many talented speakers use halos as a kind of shorthand for their ideas. In the rest of Part 3, Hendricks explores two important aspects of the offensive argumentation. First, he gives some pointers for how to apologize skillfully. A good apology doesn't belittle the audience's problems and emphasizes the apologizer's practical wisdom and disinterest. Second, Hendricks explores the concept of kairos, the right time. A good rhetorician will be aware of his audience's thoughts and emotions and will be able to recognize the perfect time to launch into an important point. The study of kairos can also help a rhetorician identify the proper medium for an argument. Each medium, texting, TV, phone calls, favors a different rhetorical technique and lends itself to a particular kind of kairos. In the final part of the book, Advanced Agreement, Hendricks gives some examples of how to use rhetorical techniques. He delivers a short speech in a town hall about fighting noise pollution using the 5-step method of oration developed by the great Roman orator Marcus Tullius Cicero: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. He also studies the oratorical techniques of Barack Obama, one of the great recent rhetoricians. In the final chapter of the book, Hendricks observes that the study of rhetoric has almost vanished from the American educational system. Partly as a result, politics have become increasingly polarized. American leaders don't know how to create deliberative rhetoric and instead become bogged down in demonstrative rhetoric. If Americans were to study rhetoric in more detail, as Hendricks suggests, then they will be able to find more common ground and reverse the growing polarization and tribalization of American society.